Alright, welcome back to the Recipe Analyst. Today we're going to be making extra tangy sourdough bread. And as you can see, my sourdough starter has doubled in size since the last time I fed it. So I think it's about ready to go into some bread. And this recipe is coming from the King Arthur's Baker's Companion. So to start off, I added in about a cup of that sourdough starter, and then about 3 cups of flour, and using a scale is a good way to make sure all your measurements are as accurate as possible. And I follow that up with about a cup and a half of water. And the recipe says to beat it vigorously, so I used a wooden spoon. I started off slowly just to make sure everything is moistened and doesn't make a big mess. And then I end up speeding up towards the end to get that vigorous mixing going. The recipe also says that you should mix it for about a minute, so I was looking at the clock every now and then to see if it had been a minute. And speaking of the sourdough starter, mine took about 11 days to get to the point that you saw it at the beginning of this video, so just be patient if you're working with a new sourdough starter. Finally, I'll cover that and let it sit for about 4 hours. I'll take a look at it after 4 hours. Looks like it has some bubbles going. And I put that in the refrigerator to rest overnight. The next morning, I go ahead and take it out of the refrigerator. Take a look at it. Doesn't really look too different to me, but I go ahead and add the rest of the flour, which is about 2 cups. Then I add 2.5 teaspoons of salt. And then I'm gonna go ahead and knead that. And I make a rookie mistake. You're supposed to start it off on a slow speed so this doesn't happen. See how all the flour flew out? That's why you started on a slow speed until everything is moistened, and then you can increase the speed after that. So I go ahead and knead it until the dough is smooth. Then I remove the dough hook and set it aside, covered, for about an hour before I come back to it. This next step is intended to increase the strength of the dough. I'm not sure if what I'm doing is the best way to do it, but I'm just following what the recipe said. So I empty the dough out onto a floured surface. I press out some of the air. Then I fold the edges toward the center before returning it to the bowl and repeating this step once an hour until the dough appears puffy. It is kind of counterintuitive in my mind to press out the air and do this every hour if the goal is to have air in the dough at the end of the day, but what do I know? So you set that aside and you end up repeating this step a bunch of times, once an hour, every hour, until the dough appears to be light and airy. But for me, I just got to a point where I was tired of waiting. I didn't really think that the dough was particularly light and airy, but I just stopped at one point and moved on to the next step. And that next step is to split the dough into 2 loaves and form it into those 2 loaves. So you can just eyeball it. The dough is pretty sticky, so even using a bench scraper is not the easiest thing. You could probably use some flour to prevent it from sticking as much, or more flour than I used. Then I go ahead and prepare the baking sheet with some parchment paper, and then I try my best to form the loaves into a round loaf and a more oval shaped loaf, as you can see here, because those are the options the recipe gives. I prepare the plastic wrap by spraying it with some cooking spray and go ahead and cover the 2 loaves. At this point, you're supposed to let the dough rise until it's puffy, but I put mine in the refrigerator because it was late at night and I didn't want to have to babysit the dough all night to see if it was puffy. So I put mine in the refrigerator overnight, and then I let it sit out all morning to warm up and get to the point that you see here. Next, I spray it with some lukewarm water before using a bread knife to create some slashes or slits in the top of the loaves. Some of these slits didn't really turn out as I wanted. You can see that one big one was pretty nice, but it was a little bit difficult. So after about 25 minutes, this is what my bread looked like. So I put it back in until it was a little bit more golden brown. So the total time was closer to 45 minutes. And then I put it on a cooling rack to cool completely. The bottom looks pretty good, but the top is just pretty pale. Maybe I sprayed too much water on the top. So after 37 hours, was it worth making this bread? So if you just look at the bread, you would probably say no. It doesn't really look all that appetizing. Here the crumb is okay. It's not that open or airy, but I don't think it's too bad, honestly. There's obviously some air in the bread, so the sourdough starter definitely did something, and you can definitely taste the sourness in the dough when you eat it. As far as the texture goes, when it was relatively fresh, the crust is pretty crisp and crunchy, which I enjoyed. And the crumb, the inside, is pretty soft but also chewy. At the end of the day, I think that this bread is best used in sandwiches. I used it for a BLT, a really skinny BLT, and a really skinny grilled cheese, and it was pretty good on those two. But given that it took 37 hours for me, plus all the time it took to prepare the starter, I'm gonna have to give this recipe a 6.5 out of 10. I'm sure I must have done something not completely correct for it to turn out this way, but it didn't turn out terrible. It's definitely usable and mostly enjoyable eating experience. It's just not something that you would be happy with after spending as much time as I did. And at the end of the day, a recipe in my mind should be giving you something that's really easy to follow, or at least let you know where the missteps may be and how to remedy those missteps if you make them, especially for a food that's a little bit difficult to nail on your first try. As always, you could read the full analysis at therecipeanalyst.com, and thanks for watching.